Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's interview, which is with Karen Hudson. Part of this week, what we've been talking about is it's living a life of worship, and this week's topic has been God with us in friendship. Now, when we had to think about who to interview, the one person came to my mind was Karen. And for those of you who don't know Karen, allow me to introduce her to you. And Karen is a single mama, owns and runs 3 businesses, all from the heart posture of stewardship and service. One is a women's integrated health clinic with her sister. Another is a direct sales business and includes a team of over 5,500 people. I said, wow, kind of holding. The third is a coaching and consulting practice. Not to mention that Karen is a 100x certified coach, Crush It You coach, of which there are only 10 in the world. Amazing. And is also a challenge consultant. Karen believes that if you have your motives right, the rest will follow, including money. And who better to unpack the topic of God with us in our friendships than an exemplary example of kingdom citizen, Karen Hudson. Thanks once again, Karen, for agreeing to this. I know this is, you're very busy, and just having the time to connect with us has been great, and we're really thankful for that. I guess just to start off, my first question to you is, can you give us an example of when you've met someone that you think was, or you know now, that was a divine connection from God?
Sure. Thanks, my dear friend, for that lovely introduction.
It doesn't do you justice, let's be honest.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. Like you said, that I know now, was because sometimes, I would say most times, right, we don't know that it's that in the moment. And the first person that really comes to mind is my dear friend Janet Rourke. And I met her through my direct sales company. We're in the same company there, and I'd met her, and she was in a Starbucks coffee line, just got nudged, right, to go live and talk about a challenge that this person named Pedro Adeo was doing. And it was the 818 Finance Challenge in August of 2019. And I know she didn't know this at the time, but that, because I kept it really hidden, was that I was in a deep, 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 dark depression, in a very, very black hole cave, deep in debt, just didn't know how I was going to get out. And I hid it from everybody because I had children that were depending on me. I had a sister I was in business with depending on me, and I felt like I really couldn't share that. That one moment where then I also saw the live, where I also then chose to click a link or go find it, because I don't even think she dropped the link. She said, go here. So I had to type it in and go find it. And was the moment, that led me back to God, actually, in a way that I had felt that I had been out of favor with God, even though I had always felt his presence with me. He hadn't really left me, but I felt that I'd been out of favor. And I didn't use that word then. I just felt that God didn't really love me. And how could he? Because I wasn't doing what I thought he wanted me to do. So going into that challenge, Janet listening to her nudge, listening to those things, me listening to it, that moment of me clicking, that challenge within the first 30 minutes opened the door to the kingdom for me, and I was back home with God, and maybe for the very first time in my life. So that was probably the most divine that I can think of in the moment, because the rest is sort of history for me of what has happened with that in my relationship now, in that one moment where I felt God didn't love me, to now. It's going to make me kind of emotional here. I walk in every second of my life today in this ongoing conversation with God. He is my best friend, my dad, my king, my all that. But I'm in a texture and tapestry of a relationship that is so tactile, that's so palatable, that's so there. And that one connection of my friend doing that was all designed to lead me back home to him and his heart, So that was probably the most divine connection I can think of, besides being born, my mother. But and I guess I needed my father in that too. But,
Yeah, I think it does help.
that would be another divine one that God decided to create me. So
yeah, I think it's like you said, it's just like it's that one person that leads to another thing, 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 that leads to another thing. And it's one of those things, like you said, it's when we build back that, everything is part of this bigger plan, but we don't really sometimes see it. It's only when we start looking back that we start to look at what's happened along the way, which gets us to here. And it's one of the things like sometimes we don't know why we're meant to meet people or see people, but sometimes it's just one of those things that we don't realize it in the moment until we look back and just see how it doesn't make sense, kind of whole thing. When you meet someone, you look at it and you're like, I don't understand how we're friends or how we met, because when you logically put it all together, it just doesn't add up in any way. It's not. You just go like, yeah, it had to be God, kind of whole thing,
Well, and I think too, Abdul, I think that's a good point, and I don't know that we always have to understand it. And sometimes I'm thinking of another person in my life who's been my person. We talk about my person, my friend of over 35 years. She's been in my life from the minute I met her on. I wouldn't question why she was a friend. So there's this other side of the coin. It doesn't make sense. But sometimes you have friends that make total sense why you're friends. But they're also a completely divine connection. They're completely orchestrated to be in your life for very, very specific reason. This person now is my clinic manager, has been my best friend. She's my boy's godmother. She's, she's this, when I pass, she'll be my person, to handle those things. So there's other divine connections that are so clear, and I'm so grateful for them, that I have the opportunity to have that kind of person in my life, and I nurture that relationship as such, so there's the two sides of the coin of that.
Yeah, I think like like I said, there's two sides of the coin to that, and it's just like with two sides of the coin, we only see one. It's the one which is divine connection, and it makes logical sense. We can thank God for it every day because it's there in front of us. We can see that. It's also what He does. It's what He does for us, which we don't notice, and it's hidden. That's the bit where the spotlight needs to come up, where we don't. So it's the one, how you met someone. I guess it's kind of one of the things, like you're running late for work, and because you're running late for, you're so annoyed because your alarm didn't go off. But but part of being late for work meant that you actually got a different bus this time than your normal bus, and you happen to sit next to someone who just kind of but you don't really think about it until maybe you've been friends with them for 15 years. Like, how did we meet? Oh, remember, that, and you're like, wow, if that hadn't happened, we might still be friends, but we might not still be friends. Or the relationship, I guess it's like, the relationship we have wouldn't be the same. We might still be friends because if it's divine, God will make sure it happens. But the relationship would not be in the because there'd be some time lost between the whole connection.
You bring up another good point. And there are divine connections that you're never friends with people, but they were placed in your life at a very pivotal second, like that helped move whatever was supposed to happen or not, move you or pivot you or do whatever, or impacted you. I mean, I think of waitresses or people at the airports or people in my life, that we just all of a sudden have this brush of a connection and it impacts me or it makes me think of something. And I think those are kind of divine connections also, where God puts something in and we notice, we get it, like at some point, maybe not right that moment, but later go, oh, so I think there's so it's an interesting continuum of what divine connection really means. People we may never know their name and people we have in our life every day and everything in between.
Oh, what I love about what you're sharing, Karen, is it kind of takes away the veil and just shows that God is so intentional, more intentional about our lives and connections than we can imagine. But also what I really loved was how you shared a bit at the start about becoming friends with God, because, we can look at God and sometimes we all have different pictures of him as a father, as a king, as a judge, but to actually walk with him as a friend. Could you unpack that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, he's my best friend. I mean, he's the best of my best friend. I now say I have 3 dads. I've been, well, 4 actually. I have Papa God and my birth father and my stepfather who love me unconditionally, and also we're a very blended family. So I've been honored to also have my sister's father, call me daughter and love him. So I've been, really humbled by the men in my life. I get to learn how I do want to be and how I don't want to be. Right. So I always say we learn both sides of that from people in our lives and the men. And these were my fathers. And when I came back home in the kingdom, I had been yearning. I could feel God pulling me. And I was searching, trying to find him, in a way that I thought he was trying to lead me to wherever, to be in connection with him. And it brings up the whole conversation of church, so we can go there if we want to. It's like, so I wasn't feeling the connection, at all. And so when I came into 100X, and I didn't even know, you guys, the word kingdom. I didn't even know what it meant when I came into 100X. So I went on a very fast track of sort of terminology and learning and deep diving, and did a lot of work with Dub Alexander and read the Miles Monroe book, several of them, and really poured into the Bible. And what happened almost immediately was it was almost electric, but I was sobbing like a baby, so who would know? But I felt like it was this immediate connection of God and I. And within a couple of weeks, all of a sudden there was like this constant conversation. And so where I had felt like it was maybe one way and then one way, like intermittently, I would pray or I would talk, and then I never really heard him as clear as I did until I got into 100X and started opening my heart and my mind that way. But when it started, it has not stopped. And so I feel that we laugh a lot, we cry a lot. I, say, oh, that's what you're up to. Like we have this ongoing conversation. And I do believe that everything in the kingdom is relational, and the most relational person we have is God, and he just wants to be in relationship with us, and he created us, he loves us, he adores us, he wants to be in that constant communication, and I get so much from it. So I just am really open to it. So, and I enjoy it. And I have, I think I've always had constant chatter in my head. I like this chatter better, because I feel like it's, with him, literally. And so before my feet hit the ground every day, I just say, hey, where are we going today? Where are you taking me today? What's the journey going to be? I can't wait to find out. And, so I just embrace being in that constant, I have a best friend that you talk to, 10 times a day, or, you're always texting and things like that. I feel like that's what my relationship with God is. And I don't need any electronics to do it, which is really lovely because the system never breaks. And I never have to worry about if I can pay the bill, right? So he's always there. And so yeah, it's probably one of the most lovely, joyful parts of my life now is that texture and tapestry. So I'm really a tactile person that way. I describe things that way. So I feel like the relationship with him has that depth, and has that sort of tenor. So yeah, and you have to be open and willing, and you have to reciprocate. So it doesn't just happen. Some people waiting around for it to happen. You have to show up and participate, in that in order to receive it, I believe.
I think like what you said is right. It's great in the sense, like you said, it's about relationships, it's that conversation. And that's, I guess, is to me, I always like to think about friendship as a two-way street, Traffic has to go both ways. It doesn't mean that the frequency of traffic both ways on both lanes has to be the same and same kind of holding it. Not necessarily that, but there has to be some traffic coming, down the other way in the other direction. And if there isn't, then there's something broken. Because you can have friends where, you don't speak for ages, but when you catch up, it's just like you just pick up when you left. And then the other people who are so-called friends, where it's all one-way traffic. As much as you try to put things to make the traffic come the other way, it doesn't come the other way at all. But like what you said, that number one friend is God. Who should be number two?
Great question. Me. So, I have a very strong belief that, first is God, second is me. I have to be my own best friend too. I have to be friends with myself. I think that it's difficult and challenging to be really great friends with anybody else if you don't know how to be a friend to yourself. And if you don't know how to listen to yourself, if you don't know how to love yourself, if you don't know how to trust yourself, I believe that those are all in direct relationship to what then we can give out and what we can receive. So what I mean by that is, I think to the level that you trust yourself that level is going to be the level that you trust other people, and potentially that other people trust you. It can't go beyond necessarily if you don't have that for yourself. Same with the capacity of love. If you're not loving yourself, it's hard to love someone else. You can think you do. You can be in the market of, oh, I love them so much, but it's filling a container of yourself because you're not filling yours first. It's like trying to bring it from the external into the internal. So I'm a real believer that it's God first and then us in our relationship with ourselves. I feel like that is the second most key relationship. And then comes, our spouses, our partners, our kids, our friends, the community, the people we work with, probably in that very hierarchy, right? I lived a life before where external people were more important than myself. And that is a system built to fail. It is a broken system when you're trying to get, validation or love or trust or filled up or whatever it is that you're seeking from the external, but you don't have anything nurturing here. You have nothing filling the pump here. So it's the philosophy of the whole air mask again, and the plane and the mom. Like, you got to put your own air on before you can help someone else and put it on, right? It's directly that analogy, that you will have greater capacity. You will have more capacity. And it's interesting, as I'm speaking this right now, I often get this question of, I just don't know how you do everything you do. I get this question, a lot. And it was a surprising question to me when it first came. And as I'm thinking right now and I'm talking to you, I know it's God, but I also know that it's, if I am taking care of me and I'm taking care of my priorities and I'm filling my tank, I just have extra reserves for everything else. I am totally available for other things and even other opportunities, other people. The capacity grows. It doesn't diminish. It can grow, especially if you're doing it from rest with God. And so that's why this friendship is so important. This friendship is so important. Then it can go here.
I love what you're sharing, Karen. It's so wise, because sometimes we can look to the external first, and then it goes weird. It can be all this kind of tension and pressure, and then it's like, it doesn't work. It works worse. And then it's like, oh no, like, especially in friendships when we're trying to connect with each other. Wow, I feel that that's such an important key. Wow, thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Karen. I guess it's like you said. It's like you said. It's like it's there. It's there. It's there. And something you mentioned earlier, when we're not going to go into church, but you mentioned church. And one thing for us as human beings is we tend to, when we go into something new or something, we tend to imprint our imagination of what it's like on that and our expectations. And that comes up with friendships as well. Like, if our we expect every friendship to be like what we believe friendship should be like, just like when we see God as our father, like, depending on what kind of parental relationship we've had, that's the same thing we kind of, project on what God's, what God is like. And like you said, it's like, if we can't trust ourselves, then we can't bother thinking about it. It's the same thing sometimes with, he's going to be our best friend. We say he's our best friend, but every friend we've had has, kind of like betrayed our trust, kind of whole thing. So we probably say he's our best friend, but we have that trust issue there still, because that's the whole thing we take with us. And the same thing about it, it's just, how we project it in relation to the friendship issues.
So is that a question?
It's a state. I was going to ask.
I wasn't sure if you were asking me a question or making a statement.
No, I think I can ask you a question, but I know I know you don't kind of think about it, because that's the thing about it. Like you said, it's it's a relationship with the father, but sometimes getting to that, it's hard because there's barriers we have to break. And being a friend, him being our best friend or being in true friendship with us, means that we have to change the way we see friendship, and that can be it can be kind of painful and hard, because we don't really understand what it needs to be or what it could be like, because we put those restrictions, those barriers, man-made, self-made, society-made, onto what the relationship with God should be like.
Absolutely. And I think you say, like, friendships, or how our relationships with our fathers on earth have been, and we see that, or how we've been raised in the church to believe God is, wherever we learned or had those impressions of both of those things, who God is and what God wants, and or what friends are, what friends want. I had a mother who absolutely loved me unconditionally, but she felt like everybody had strings attached to every single thing they did, And so she had a filter of being able to, she judged friendships based on, right, that fear or what she thought they wanted or didn't want, or what was she going to have to give in order to be friends. And so, yeah, I think it does matter. And I think we have to, if we want to have a closer, more intimate relationship with God, ourselves, or others, it's breaking through, breaking down, breaking off some of the walls, the barriers, the limiting beliefs, the old structures of what we thought it was or supposed to be, in order to allow what is. And it's almost like getting to the point, excuse me, not predicting it. I think it's almost getting to the point of not trying to figure it out, like being able to let go of figuring it out. I don't know about you guys, but for me, I have better relationships with people when I don't have expectations. If I'm not attached to an outcome, if I let the outcome just follow. That's a hard place to be. Sometimes it's challenging to not try to predict or want or need or think what it could be. But I believe that with God too. If I don't try to make up what I'm praying for, make up what I think he's trying to lead me to, then I don't have to be attached to the outcome. That's true for my friendships too. It's also true for my relationships with my boys. Like if I don't try to make them into something or someone, same with myself, right? So I think all that can cloud what you're talking about. And I think it is important, and a really important piece of work to do is to be less and less attached to an outcome and an expectation, which then means we have to just really work at being present, right? Being really, really present in the moment and listening to what's happening. Like being in the moment and just responding in the moment, as opposed to trying to be, diverting our attention to the future or the past, but really being here.
Wow, that's a lot of freedom in that approach, outlook. Karen, could I ask, we're thinking about divine friendship. What would you say are the markers that you would, say, oh yeah, that is a divine friendship? I'm just mindful that we have sometimes friendships that we might feel are not divine, and that, we might need to put some barriers up. Have you any thoughts on kind of navigating that sort of?
Yeah. Are you asking also when they are and when they aren't, and what might?
It's a bit of a loaded big question.
Yeah, because I do have definite thoughts on both.
Cool.
And I think I would say it more like I do have definite beliefs, but behaviors. I have definite things that I do. One of my what has been coined now Karenisms by a few people is it's sort of following me, is to I just lead with love and have really good boundaries. And if I can lead with love and I can be that open, and I know where I stand on certain things, or I know what feels, what's the word I want to use? When I know what feels like joy or more openness, but what also feels like a closed door, or I want to take a step back, right? Then I am able to make those choices in response rather than reacting. I think there's a very key difference in those two things. And not that I don't ever react, but I try to take a pause for the cause if I feel myself doing that, because I like to respond as opposed to react. But if you're leading with love, then all things are possible. But if you have really good boundaries and you know what yours are, or you have, like you said, markers is a really good word, where you want to sort of be caution, like the little thing on the truck that backs up, beep, 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 that's kind of goes off in my head, right? That is sort of, And there's this feeling I call, it's going to be funny, I call it feeling slimed. There's this just feeling that gets washed over me or comes at me where toxicity of some kind sort of feels present. And I'm not saying, I mean, it could be a spirit of something, but it also could just be a person who doesn't have good boundaries and doesn't really know it. It's a blind spot, but I feel it. And so I take a step back, or I know then how to react. So for me, I think it's taken a lot of practice. And here's the other thing. I think we build trust. I think we build relationships. And so I think that's how intimacy, friendship, close emotional intimacy happens, by things being built. It isn't just sort of like one and done. Okay, now you have my trust bucket. Now it's your whole responsibility, friend, to prove me wrong or right. And you haven't even told them that you gave them the bucket. They haven't even agreed to the job. And you've given them a job, right? And so I often say, because I do a lot of couples, coaching and things like that, just relationships with parents, like, you have to think about what you just asked them to do, but you didn't ask them to do, and now you're holding them responsible. So there's that, right? So I think if we look at how we build, then trust becomes more permanent, right? As we take it. Friendships become stronger, deeper, more emotionally intimate, because they are seen as built, right? And we learn, and not that they're not going to be fraught with things, but we learn how to communicate or not. And those times then can be the time, this person is here. Now this other person I'm going to get closer to, right? So if we approach it from a point of not everybody has to be at the same level, not everybody has to be the same kind of friend, not everybody comes in our life for the same reasons, then we're going in a little bit more open-hearted and a little bit more open-minded. But we can always lead with love.
Yeah, that's so good. As you're talking, it's like this beautiful, intimate dance, but that it can start slow. It can start like a slow, tentative dance, and like with you meeting your friend just in a queue. Who knew? But there was none of that. Yeah, going in too deep, too fast. But I'm just things out. Yeah.
I've done that too much in my life.
We all have.
I learned my lessons, especially in romantic relationships, and then it's like a setup. It's just a setup,
Yeah.
and you give a person a job and they don't know it,
Yeah.
and then it's like,
God,
if you really love me, you would know, like, why? I didn't even agree to it. You didn't even tell me you were giving me the job. Like, what is that? What's up with that? So it's, I think once we sort of get that framework in us, and then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't agree to that. That person might be totally trustworthy, you just didn't know he had the job.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing about it. It's I think I read somewhere that like we have like the different emotions we go through, like when you're angry, it's all, sometimes it's like you say like, oh, but they broke my trust, but you never told them what the boundary of the trust, what the trust line laid, kind of whole thing. And there's all the expectation that, they should have known. I'm not a mind reader, kind of like you said. It's one of those things where you put something on someone without it. And I guess it's like you said, depending on the friendships you've had and different friendships, everyone is different. But there's always the expectation that because you're in the same community as me, you should be like someone else in the same community, kind of whole thing, like, Hillary should be the same like Amanda, because they're in the same, but everyone's different, and then expectations is always that. And sometimes even with friendship, because it's two sides to the coin, is we feel hurt when someone doesn't invite us to something where, but Hillary asked Amanda, but she didn't ask me. Why did she not ask me, kind of whole thing? when it's an expectation, which we always bring into everything. And that goes in with a relationship with the Father as well. We bring in expectations of that and what the friendship should be like. And like you said earlier on, God will provide. He provides the opportunities for us to get what we want, but we have to take action, kind of whole thing,
That's the bottom line, right? I mean, like I say this probably 20 times a day, God doesn't have a lasso and just kind of go and rope you and pull you out or say, okay, it's time to now go do this. Like, we only get to co-create with him, in my opinion, when we start to move. Then he can come alongside us. If we're not moving, he's waiting for us to take the move, take the action, like you said. And I think you brought up something else that I'd love to talk about too, is this whole idea of, if you're in the same community, somehow that means you have the same beliefs. And that's not always the case. God gives us, free choice, to believe different things. We can all believe in God, but we might have different, political beliefs. We might have different ideas about food and where it fits in our lives or anything. I mean, just name it, right? And I think it is one of the best tests, of really leading with love is honoring other people's right to believe what they believe and being able to love them anyway. You don't have to believe what I believe. You don't have to vote the way I vote. You don't have to wear the clothes the way I wear. You don't have to practice X, Y, and Z the way I do for me to love you, for me to honor you, for me to be your friend. We can agree to disagree. And I think that's a touchy point sometimes for people. They feel like, but if you, and I just have to say, that's a challenge and an opportunity for us when those things come up. And I early on, I've had that belief most of my life, that judgment wasn't of Jesus, and that's really what led me out of many church communities. Is I would be there for a little bit and then I felt judgment, and there was like, you're supposed to be around these kind of people, not around these kind of people, who could be your friends, who couldn't be your friends, and even to the point of who you could date. At times it was subtle, sometimes and not so subtle, but I haven't had an overarching belief in my heart, so I'm going to say it's from God, is to lead with love. But we don't all have to look the same, be the same, believe the same. We are all kings and queens and children in the kingdom. And to be able to really live that inside out is, I think, one of the hardest but most honoring things to God we could do. So in really practicing what I believe Jesus practiced, walking on this earth, was just that, to love everyone and not let judgment be there. So I think my true relationship with God and the friendship is not to judge and then turn around and do that, not with myself and then not with others. I mean, you can take that model with just about everything, but I've had it happen in, our communities, and I just have to say, it's okay to disagree. It's okay. It doesn't mean I love you any less. Doesn't mean I honor you any less. Just because the way you voted, I believe about this or that. And boy, we've been challenged the last few years, right? And in our world with issues and things that have come up, and everybody having the opportunity to grow in their understanding about a lot of issues. Friendships have been tested to the max. And I always came back to, okay, well, what would Jesus do? Like, where's the heart? And where that for me is always my center.
Well, that's a very good point. And what would Jesus do? And I think a lot of people they don't really ask, what would Jesus do? It's, what do I think Jesus should do? not what he to do. It's what do I think Jesus should do? Because I like the way you talked about the friendship, because as human beings, like the folks say, like birds of a feather flock together, kind of holding, like if you hang around with turkeys, you're going to be like the soar with eagles. There's loads of things which kind of tells us to forming ourselves into little groups. But like you said, part of being God with us and in us, and we're meant to be a reflection of Him, and that means that we can't, by segregating or be intentional of being very closed in how and selective in who we do, we choose to be our friends because they don't share the same political views as us, they don't do that. It's not what Jesus would do, because like if you look at the 12 disciples, kind of whole thing, who were his friends, they range from a very rich tax collector to a fisherman. It just ranged, and that's kind of the whole thing about it. And so when we say like, it's like, I like, it's a great thing, like, the one, what would Jesus do? It's more like, what do I think Jesus should do? Because when you look at it in hindsight, it's like, would Jesus really have done that? Or is that what you think you want, try and justify your actions by the means just to make everything right and feel happy, kind of whole thing, right? Kind of whole thing, But Jesus, shouted at it, was angry at the Pharisees, and so just, he wasn't angry at them themselves. He was angry at what they were represented. Nicodemus was one of them who he's had dinner with, who helped him, who got his body very kind of whole thing. So it's one of those things, there's a lot more to it, but it's what we see, and we're trying to fit everything into that kind of way. And God with us in friendship kind of expands beyond that. Go on.
I love that so much, Abdul, because it's like God can bring along a divine friendship, but it doesn't necessarily look like what we think it's going to look like. So like what you were saying, Karen, about just being open, to just be open that maybe God is bringing along a divine friendship, and it's just going to be outside of your grid of what you're expecting, but it's still God, and it's still, beautiful. Oh, I love that. So good. So good, guys.
So, I like what you said earlier, Karen, you said it's those things. It's lead with love, okay, which is challenging in itself, but also have firm boundaries. How do you determine what your boundaries should be, and how do you make sure that they are secure and firm? Because sometimes, like you said, when your heart's not healed and you're pretty much searching for the boundaries you think you have can become very flexible, which doesn't give you what you want, which meant that because, I have someone who is a friend, in inverted commas, who keeps coming to me to ask me for money. Sorry, this is an example, by the way, guys.
Are you talking about real friend, or are you going into an example? Okay.
He comes, borrows some money from me, kind of whole thing about it. Says they'll pay me back in about 2 weeks. They don't delay a month, kind of whole thing about it. So I said, okay, and I keep coming back and holding, like, they owe me about $6,000, and it's been 5 years, and they don't seem to do that. But I keep coming back, and I keep kind of like repeating the same thing again, even though other people can say, like, you need to set firm boundaries, but I can't, because I kind of feel a bit guilty, because, Jesus is very caring, compassionate. I feel by saying no to them, I'm not being caring or compassionate, or not taking care of their needs, which I think is my obligations. Kind of whole thing.
You said about 10 things I want to address in that one example. I'm like, okay, wait a minute, where do we start with that? Well, first of all, we have to really stress the healed heart. I mean, that really is what I call ground zero, right? It's sometimes you don't even know that. I mean, if you have blind spots and you don't have a healed heart, you don't sometimes know you don't have a healed heart. It's a sort of, is that what's called an oxymoron? Like you just kind of go through, the never ending story. So I think one of the ways that an indication of needing support outside of yourself is exactly what you just talked about. Like, if there's a repeating pattern that brings about a particular feeling, but you end up always putting it into a bucket of, well, I believe that's what God wants me to do, but you haven't really asked, you aren't really hearing, you don't really know, you're just making that assumption, you're doing it because of what you believe, not because you've heard from God per se. That's an indication. If there's a repeating pattern that ends up, you have a certain set of feelings and then you have to shift your feelings, to make it still work for you and not really work on those, that's a indication that you need to get some support outside of that. The second thing is, I actually believe boundaries can be flexible. I think they're an ever-moving thing where they can be very strong and rigid, like they're here, but you have the power to move them back or forward or wherever you need based on the situation. And I think that's sort of an art and a science. So I think what I mean by boundaries for me and how I've set them is, certainly I have a boundary if I feel safe or unsafe, like literally or emotionally, or something makes me feel a certain way. I'm going to extend what I call my boundary out. A person doesn't get the closest to me where there's no barrier at all. There's a boundary when I feel that. I had a situation in my life where I had to set a boundary with my daughter, which is the reason I have my boys, that is still in place 14 years later, that I haven't moved, right? So there are some times where you create a boundary and it could be easy because it's a person you love or it's a person that's close to you to make them, iffy, or, oh, you can step over it this time, or, oh, you can do this and that. But what I've learned in creating that particular boundary of physical distance, for us, is that you actually create safety even for the other person. Like, when you set a boundary for yourself, you're actually allowing people to really understand how to be in relationship with you. So it's the, sort of Dr. Philism that we teach people how to treat us by those boundaries. And so it actually is freedom for everybody and information and knowledge for everybody, because if we don't have a clear boundary, then people don't know how to relate. If it's always iffy and iffy, they never really know what to do or how to show up. The other part is, if you set a boundary inside your own head, but you don't tell people about the boundary, you just got a hot mess is all I want to say. Okay? Because people don't know how to relate. They don't know how to show up. You're going to be all messy with it. And people think that boundaries mean confrontation, or that somehow, even people feel like, I've heard from clients that they feel boundaries, that they're being selfish. And really what happens in that is that it's that relationship with yourself. It goes back to that. If you can love yourself enough to know what feels good to yourself and what you want and what feels safe to you emotionally, physically, financially, even in your case, Abdul, like, is it safe? Do I even have that money? Is it going to put me in hardship? Are we even asking ourselves that question? Or are we sacrificing ourselves for what we think is a feel good, or what God I'm supposed to do, but it actually has nothing to do with God. It has nothing to do with that. He's not telling you, he's not guiding you. You don't have the money, it's out of pocket, so to speak, with God. I call that being out of pocket with God, because you're operating on a level over here that's not here. And so boundaries come with defining, number one, you have to be in relationship with yourself in order to set them. If you're not in relationship with yourself and you don't know yourself, you don't know what kind of boundary to set. You're just going to be taking someone else's or some book or something and not be true to yourself. So boundaries are very individual. They're very, I think, people specific, or should be. I think they can be created. Let me put it like that. For people specific. I mean, there's certain ones, we're not going to take certain behavior. I don't want to be around certain. I mean, there's certain ones that are for everybody. Like, I don't allow smoking in my home. I don't allow drinking in my home. Those are just boundaries, right? And anybody can do what they want, but those are boundaries for my home. But some will be, I might have a boundary with a certain person because I don't trust them in a certain way because of an experience. So I create them. I had a person that started to talk about another person in a certain way. This is a recent client, or was actually in a meeting, and he had a tendency to sort of talk negative about other people in the conversation. And I set a boundary right in the moment. And I think this is important. And this is where you can tell people, don't wait too long, just tell them in the moment. And, but you have to get over your own fear if you think you're confronting or being too selfish. So heart healing, let me put it out there again for that. Because that's just a barrier. That's a barrier to true friendship, intimacy, relations, growing with God. If you're not speaking up. But in the moment, it's so current, right? In the moment, it can be addressed, and it can be just addressed currently. And I just said, look, I want to continue this conversation with you, but I can't if you continue to talk about other people in this way. It's a little aggressive for me. It's a little this for me. And so in talking to you, I either need that to stop, or, you need to find someone else to work with. And I think it was kind of shocking, but to that person, because I don't know that anybody has ever really told him that. I mean, I hope people have, but I'm sure I was not the first person he does that with. People they usually have patterns of behavior. And so, but for me, that's not tolerable, right? So for me, I know that if, like, we wanted to start, like, in this conversation right now, oh, so-and-so doesn't do this, so-and-so doesn't that, I would say, time out, wait a minute. Let's talk about that in a way where it isn't person specific, or let's talk about a certain behavior, but I'm not willing to participate in that. That's just me. I need to do that for me. So I don't blame other people or get judgmental, but I know that the more current I am in telling somebody what works for me or doesn't, the less charge it has. If I come back later, it has more emotional charge. And I think I'm a big fan of how you talk. I'm a big fan of not blaming people. I'm a big fan of saying, look, that doesn't work for me. Are you willing to change that? Are you willing to adjust that so that we can keep talking? Or if that doesn't work for you, then I want to support you finding the right person that's a fit for you. So I'm not making them wrong, but I'm setting my boundaries. So I think it's practice of being able to say that, right? With the boys, I mean, even at 8, I set a boundary of what kind of words can be said. And, like, if you want to talk to me, we can't use that word, or you can't talk to me that way. You can say that, but you can't say it that way. We're teaching all the time, we're saying what's okay in our world. So I think boundaries are misunderstood, underused, and thought of as hard to do. And I have a different view on them.
Thank you so much.
So good.
Karen. I think I've just summarized, I guess, from what we had so far and conversation. I guess the one thing about it is that it's lead with love, set firm boundaries, because that is exactly what the Father does. He leads with love and also has firm boundaries as well. Since we are meant to be a reflection of God because He's in us, and we're meant to reflect Him to everything, the same thing we need to do with everyone in all our friendships is that it is just lead with love and have boundaries, because that's fine. It starts with Him, us, other people in that thing. The bit we tend to forget, it's a bit of us, but that's actually quite cool because of the fundamental. It's a link between there and there in both directions. And that's very important as well. And I guess the last thing is, how do people connect with you if they would like to find out more going forward?
Oh, great. Thanks for asking that. They can do that a couple ways. One is they can just find me on Facebook. I'm Karen Hudson, just exactly how it says PDX, which is the airport acronym for Portland, Oregon. It's PDX. Or you can contact me through my website, KarenSHudson.com.
Thank you very much, Karen.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Great conversation.
Yeah, such an honor to be speaking with you, Karen. Thank you so much for your time. Such a blessing.
Thank you. I've loved it. I loved it. Thanks for having me.